The Bard is an artisan of magic. They are knowledgeable and witty musicians, as well as warriors capable of lethal arts. Druids are masters of nature and primeval magics, capable of transforming into beasts. You put them together and you get the Pied Piper musically commanding bestial armies, or literal songbirds singing magical blessings as they fly across the battlefield. So if you're interested in playing a character that's just as likely to be found at a magical battle or Woodstock, stick around for today's video. Both Druids and Bards can play a powerful support role, and while their main ability scores don't line up, their buffs certainly can. By using wild shapes, we can make up for low physical stats. For instance, we don't need high strength when you can just be a bear, and focus all of our points on spells. With both the ability to fly and the ability to cast spells at range, a Druid Bard has an incredible keep-away game. These builds are all about putting your party or your summons out in front and buffing them up, while keeping yourself out of harm's way. Druids are arguably one of the most powerful classes, and Bards are an excellent class and among the most versatile classes. Depending on your DM's discretion, you'll be able to use your bardic performance while in animal form, and that can set you up for a sweetly efficient situation of flying around in wild shape while using your action for repeating spells, such as Call Lightning, and your bonus action for bardic inspirations. There are of course some downsides. The glaring issue with this class combo is that we're splitting between a Wisdom class and Charisma class as our spellcasting abilities. And if we want to have decent spells, there isn't much left for a good ability score spread. Outside of the wild shapes, we'll be pretty squishy and have to rely on magical ability. We aren't martial classes and can't use a martial weapon. We'll have weaker spellcasting progression than a single class and are mostly locked into a support role. We'll have to make use of impactful low-level spells since it'll be a while until we get past unneeded spells and hit higher level stuff. Most of the features we care about can't be gained with a single level like a cleric level or a barbarian level. Bards are versatile classes but don't add a ton with only a few levels. We aren't getting the maneuverability of a rogue's cunning action, and we can't even effectively dip for heavy armor proficiency effectively since druids won't wear metal. This is not a strong combo, and if you're simply looking to optimize for damage, fighter levels for fighter abilities, action surge, and heavy armor may be better than levels in Bard. For spellcasting, a level dip for a life cleric level with channel divinity may be better than druid, or even just the magic initiate feat for cantrips like Booming Blade. Even things like Paladin, Artificer, Monks, or Warlocks make better level dips. You get things like Martial Arts, Flurry of Blows, Eldritch Blast, Agonizing Blast, Divine Smite, and Warlock spell slots. Ultimately, in most cases, we're just going to be in the Arcane Trickster situation, where our core features just don't mesh for much reduced damage. Next, by taking multiple classes, we'll have quite a few features competing for our actions, and in a lot of cases, we'll have to choose between them or need prep time to be best ready for combat. And of course, like with any subclass option, we're giving up on 20th level capstone features and other late game abilities, as well as getting to our mid-game features significantly later as a multi and dual class than a standard class. If you're wondering when this combo starts to kick in, to do most of what we want to do with it, we'll need to at least get 3 levels of Bard to pick up the first Bard archetype feature, and at least 2 levels of Druid for Wild Shape. But really, we also want our first Druid archetype features as well, so I'd say the builds will really kick in at the 6th character level. Now let's get into the class features that we really care about, because there's a lot of weird interactions between all of them. Starting with the significant Bard class feature, we have Bardic Inspiration, of course. The core unique feature of the Bard requires a high Charisma for a number of uses, and is gained with a single level in Bard. As a bonus action, you get to provide a Bardic Inspiration die to one of your allies, a d6 which improves at later levels. They can add to a d20 roll. Normally, you use this for a player buff, but depending on what route we go, there may even be more options for us. Next, we have Spellcasting. Mixing spellcasting classes is a surge for spellcasting, but strange mechanically, especially when it comes to spellcasting progression and your mixed pool of spell slots. But for now, know that access to Bardic spells gives us extra options and extra spell slots we can use. Importantly for us, you can use an instrument as your spellcasting focus for Bard spells, but you don't have to. This means we can use the same focus for both our Bard and our Druid spells. And next we have Expertise. This Bardic ability lets us add double our proficiency bonus on a couple chosen skills. Extra skill points are always generically useful, but depending on how we want to work the build, it can be incredibly useful from workhorses like Perception and Stealth to Knowledge skills. And next gained at 5th level, we have Font of Inspiration, and this is essentially an upgrade to our Bardic Inspirations. With Font of Inspiration, we regain our Bardic Inspirations on a short rest instead of a long rest. This lets us use them a lot more freely, and in most campaigns, you'll be able to do an inspiration essentially every round instead of only a few times a day. Next, we have Bardic College. We have a few directions that we can go with this build, and they take a lot from specific Bard colleges. We'll get into them a little bit more in a second, but for now, know that we value these college selections a lot. We're doing some weird stuff here, so old standbys like College of Eloquence, College of Swords, and College of Valor need not really apply. Now let's move on to our significant Druid class features, starting with spellcasting. Druids already have strong spells on their spell list, including healing, damage, and unique damage over time spells, among other standard stuff. Mixing spellcasting classes is a bit weird mechanically, but for now, know that access to the Druid spell list gives us extra options and additional spell slots that we can use. And then next, of course, we have Wild Shape, which lets us transform into an animal along with all of our stuff, magic items, and whatnot. This is one of the more powerful combat abilities, and I could make a whole video about Wild Shape, its applications, and weirdness. Let me know in the comments if you would like that. But for now, just know that Wild Shape is a central feature we're going to be using for some of our multi-class builds. And then we have Wild Companion, an optional rule out of Tasha's. This lets us sacrifice a use of our Wild Shape feature to cast Find Familiar instead. Familiars are sneakily powerful, and some of our builds will rely on that for, let's call it, shenanigans. And then we have Druid Circle. Again, we'll go into this a bit later, but the Druid Circle features are powerful and the Druid subclasses are at the core of some of our builds gained at our 2nd class level. Our suggestions don't make use of it, but if you go your own way for raw damage, consider the Circle of Spores for the subclass feature Symbiotic Entity to become the biggest weapon. When it comes to ability scores, our plan is to focus mainly on spellcasting and often using wild shapes, which means we want to focus mostly on our mental stats. Both Wisdom and Charisma are going to be vital for us, and we want them both as high as possible. It leans a bit harder on Charisma though, since both Bardic Inspirations and many of the archetype features rely on it, so Charisma should be our highest score, followed by Wisdom at 2nd. Our 3rd highest score should be Constitution. We get to cheat on our hit points a lot due to Wild Shape, but we can't always count on it, and a high Constitution will not only help us to stay alive, but it will help us maintain concentration on our spells. Intelligence, Strength, and Dexterity can be all of our dump stats. We can make use of medium armor, so we don't need the Dexterity, but if you have the points to spend, Dexterity would be the most impactful of the 3 to make better use of light armor proficiency or even finesse weapons. When it comes to feats, we're trying hard to be a summoning and support character, and while none of the following feats are 100% needed for the strategy, they're all strong options for a support character and should be at least considered when you gain ability score increases. First, we have Inspiring Leader. At the cost of a 10-minute hype-up speech, you can grant your allies a number of temporary hit points equal to your level, plus your Charisma modifier. You can do this once per short rest, and since you can affect 6 creatures, this can be like adding 50 to 60 hit points across your group every short rest, which can really turn the tide in battle. Worth taking, but remember that temporary hit points don't stack. And then we have Knight of the Crown. This one is a strong option, but it depends on your DM's approval, since it's technically lore locked to the Dragonlance setting. It's a half feat first of all, and it gives you +1 to your choice of the physical scores. The Surge ability lets you use your bonus action to command an ally to make an additional attack roll with an extra d8 worth of attack damage. You get to do this a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest, and depending on how strong your allies are, it's a ton of extra damage and practically like 2 weapon fighting, since you'll be getting 2 attacks and a turn like offhand attacks. And then we have Knight of the Rose. Just like Knight of the Crown, you'll need DM approval for this Dragonlance feat. It's also a half feat, but for the mental scores instead. As a bonus action, we can provide temporary hit points to an ally equal to 1d8 plus proficiency plus our mental stat. A lot of what we're doing uses temporary hit points, but it's nice to have these emergency backup defense abilities. And now let's talk Wild Shape. Most of our strategy here focuses more on summoning than wild shaping ourselves, but it's still a powerful feature to have. We're spread thin on stats, so simply turning into something tough when you need to is a great option, and you'll want to prioritize things with high armor class and hit points. The direwolf or giant hyena are fantastic picks early on, followed by the chunky giant toad and giant elk later on. When it comes to what class you should start with, at first it may seem better to start with Bard since you snag an extra skill proficiency, but you'll get an extra one anyway if you start as Druid before switching to Bard. Druids get an odd hodgepodge of martial weapon proficiencies, but they're mostly just simple weapons. What you're really picking between is a set of saving throws and 2 instrumental proficiencies versus herbalism kit proficiency. You wouldn't be wrong to start with either, but I value herbalism kits highly and I'd recommend starting out as a druid on that alone. And that kind of hurts to say as a bard main. Now let's talk Druid Bard builds. This multiclass combination has a lot of completely different ways to go with some very different results. Let's go through some of the more interesting and impressive possibilities. First, we have the Feather Ruffler. Our goal is to annoy the absolute hell out of our opponents using a team of pestering birds and our own heckling to ensure our allies almost always attack with advantage, while our enemies miss their marks. To accomplish this, we need to start with 3 Druid levels, selecting the Circle of the Land and specifically the Coast spell set. Next, we take 3 Bard levels, selecting the College of Lore archetype. College of Lore gives us short rest refreshing spell slots and some key defensive options. We follow up with 1 more Druid level for a total of 4. We do this firstly so we don't miss out on the ASI, but also so that our Natural Recover feature can restore a 2nd level Druid spell on a short rest. Finally, all of our remaining levels should go into Bard, giving us a final split of Bard 16 and Druid 4 by the end. Now to wrangle some birds. Firstly, we can take advantage of the Druid's optional rule Wild Companion and use our Wild Shape to summon a familiar instead. Specifically, we want to summon an owl because it has a 60-foot fly speed and the flyby feature. Flyby lets our bird move in and out of combat without provoking an attack of opportunity. For bird number 2, we need the 2nd level Druid spell Summon Beast. Summon Beast's air mode also has flyby, and we can control both at the same time. So how does all this work? Before going into combat, we set up our 2 birds using Find Familiar and Summon Beast, but we don't use them for dealing damage. No. Instead, we send them off like annoyable target-seeking missiles and have them use the help action to distract foes before flying out of reach. When you use the help action type in this way, the next time one of your allies attacks the target, it will have advantage. None of this uses your action economy and only requires our concentration for the Summon Beast spell. For our bonus action, we want to use our Bardic Inspiration on our allies as needed, heal via Healing Word, or we also get a great reaction from our Bardic feature, Cutting Words. With Cutting Words, whenever an enemy manages to get a good shot at one of our birds, we can roll a Bardic Inspiration die to make them flub the attack. As a bard, we also have access to the spell Silvery Barbs, which imposes disadvantage on an attack and grants advantage on a target's next roll, all for the low cost of a 1st level slot and a reaction. For our actual action, we can do some healing spells via Cure Wounds, but for a ranged option for damage, I rather like the rather underutilized spell Ice Knife. We get it thanks to our Druid levels. Its long range only uses our 1st level spell slots and can do serious damage to a group of enemies. The target of our spell attack rolls take 1d10 plus 2d6, and everybody within 5 feet also takes 2d6, giving us a decent blaster caster game. But what if they decide to come after us directly with martial weapons and melee attacks? The Circle of the Land Coast spells have us covered for defensive options in the form of Mirror Image and Misty Step. Mirror Image is one of the most powerful defensive spells that doesn't require concentration, and if anybody gets too close for comfort, we can just Misty Step away. So on a single turn, we can grant advantage on 2 targets using our birds, fire off an Ice Knife, and inspire an ally, then use Cutting Words to blank an attack. Or we can always use our birds for plenty of utility actions. Finally, once you reach 6 Bard levels, we can use the Lore Bard's additional magical secrets to pick up the 3rd level Druid spell Conjure Animals, even though we continued progressing in Bard. With Conjure Animals, our 2 bird trick multiplies into a 9 bird trick as we get to summon 8 giant owls. 8 giant owls. That's 8 more, 9... It's a lot of birds. Each battle-ready giant owl has flyby and can use the help action, meaning your allies will basically always attack with advantage for the rest of the campaign. And then we have the Pied Piper of Velociraptors, which sounds like the title to a movie that would have been better than any of the Jurassic World movies that we got. Our plan here is essentially the classic Velociraptor Rancher Druid class with a bardic twist. We're going to have a chattering horde of tiny dinosaurs, and we'll keep them constantly refreshed with temporary hit points. To accomplish this, we want to start with 5 Druid levels, and we want to take the Circle of the Shepherd. Once again, we want to make sure that we take Conjure Animals once we gain access to 3rd level spells. Then we take 3 levels in Bard, selecting the College of Glamour. Finally, all of our remaining levels should be going towards Druid for a final split of Bard 3 and Druid 17. For anybody who has abused Conjure Animals before, our original class tactic should be very familiar. For the low cost of a 3rd level spell and a single action, we can summon a whopping 8 Velociraptors, which all have not only an extra attack apiece, but also pack tactics. This means our Dino Pack can charge in for 16 attacks with advantage. With all these extra attacks, you're not only likely to get a ton of hits, but likely critical hits every turn. This can be some ridiculous burst damage with a good average, since this major damage is spread across so many attacks. But our Raptors are pretty squishy at the end of the day. Thanks to the Circle of the Shepherd, we can create a Spirit Totem as a bonus action to grant temporary hit points equal to 5 plus our Druid level to each of our Raptors, effectively doubling their hit points. We only get one of those totems per short rest though, and that's where the Bard part comes in. By taking College of Glamour, we get the feature Mantle of Inspiration to grant 5 temporary hit points to a number of creatures equal to our Charisma modifier as a bonus action. In addition, when we grant them these hit points, they get to immediately dash up to their movement speed. It only costs a Bardic Inspiration, so we can start off with the totem, and whenever one or more of our Raptors gets temporary hit points removed, we can top them all off and dash them where they need to be with a quick play of the flute, or whichever instrument you feel like fits your character. You don't have to be the Pied Piper of Velociraptors. You can do whatever you want. Next, we have Psychic Wolf, which sounds like one of the most generic Xbox 360 gamer tags I've ever heard in my life. For this last build, we're going to forget mage power and focus on combat power in the form of psychic blades on our claws. You heard that right. Even without a fighting style, we can become an animal battle master. We become the biggest weapon beast possible and add in a ton of psychic damage to their attacks, a rarely resisted damage type. To accomplish this, we need a nasty subclass combo. We want to start with a 2-level dip in Druid levels and select the Circle of the Moon. We then want to take 5 Bard levels, selecting the College of Whispers. We spend all of our remaining levels in Druid for a final split of 5 Bard, 15 Druid. It's a bit awkward to push hard into Bard class early on, even though the Druid class will be our primary class, but it will be worth it. The strategy here is a high damage rushdown build. The College of Whispers features Psychic Blades, functions on our attacks in wild shape, and will be pouring all of our Bardic Inspirations into our attacks. The unarmed attacks of beasts still count as weapon attacks, and the Psychic Blades don't count as spellcasting. Arguably, we can even perform bardic performances as an animal, depending on how your DM rules it. Once we have 5 Bard levels, we not only restore our Bardic Inspirations on a short rest, but the extra damage also increases to 3d6. Thanks to the Circle of the Moon, we have access to the strongest wild shapes and can transform into them as a bonus action. We don't get an extra attack, but once around, we'll be able to pour on the damage essentially for free. At the beginning of the video, I made a joke about this being a character that you could play at a music festival and stuff, and I did not make that lightly. The one time I saw a Druid Bard come across my table, it was when I had situated the game to be about going to a music festival after a long battle, just as kind of a reprieve, and somebody showed up with that character, and they basically played them like Chong from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and if you don't remember who that one-off character was, Secret Tunnel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe because we're putting out new content like this all the time. Go see what we're doing over on skullsplitterdice.com. I did take a little bit of a break there, so we did have a sort of hiatus in videos for a second, only because I've been doing this for how many years now every week. I needed a little bit of a break, but just know I have no plans of stopping. I love talking about D&D. I love hearing your guys' conversations down in the comments about what characters you have and all that stuff. And looking forward to the next year or however many years I have left of doing this. Thanks again for watching. My name's Patrick Ferguson from Skull Splitter Dice, and until next time, farewell.